Hey everyone, welcome to the Power and Motor Yacht Podcast. I'm your guest host, Simon Murray with the AIM Marine Group. This episode is brought to you by Visit Lauderdale, and they want everyone under the sun to get ready to be wowed because the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show is back. Whether you're a seasoned sailor, passionate angler, or yacht enthusiast, you're invited to explore the world's largest in-water boat show in the yachting capital of the world. Meet renowned yacht builders, discover the latest water toys, and indulge in dockside dining with stunning waterfront views. Make unforgettable memories on and off the dock. Set sail for visitlauderdale.com/events for details. Our guest today is Ellery Andrews, Deputy Director of History Fort Lauderdale, a historical society located on the Riverwalk downtown that encompasses a museum, multiple historic sites, and a research center that has functioned uninterrupted since 1962. Welcome, Ellery.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon. It's wonderful to be on the podcast.
Great for you to be here. So why spend an entire show on Fort Lauderdale? Well, the yachting cap, it's
Yeah.
good question, somewhat rhetorical, but the yachting capital of the world is practically synonymous with boating, thanks to FLIBS, a wide channel and docks that can accommodate vessels up to and probably even beyond 300 feet long, and all the world-class boatyards that make up Marina Mile. But it wasn't always that way. Columnist Mike Smith delves into the unknown history of the River City. What a title!
Yes.
Mike,
And we are definitely a river city.
yeah, that's for sure. And Mike, with this one, I think you got yourself a book in the making. So while we look forward to reading that story soon, Ellery, what is it about the past that entices you personally the most?
So my family is not originally from Fort Lauderdale or even Florida, but I grew up in a historic or an old town with a pioneering family. So my family is a founding family for my hometown, which is a bit earlier than Fort Lauderdale. It is 1670, not 1911.
Oh, wow.
So it has been something I've been accustomed to and I grew up around, and talking to friends and people growing up, I realized that it was not a very common mentality to have. So I was blessed and very thankful that I got to come down to Fort Lauderdale and to experience a new type of history. While it is an earlier or more recent history, it's still the most important parts of the United States, other than our American Revolution, jammed into a very short period of time.
Can I guess where you're from? What state?
Sure.
Virginia?
Connecticut.
Connecticut. Okay,
Yep.
wow. All right. That's your family goes back a long ways. That's like
Yeah.
the founding of this country. But yeah, totally. And I think Florida too. I don't know. I grew up in New Jersey, and from my historical background with when it comes to like history class, I feel like Florida was touched on, but like very quickly pivoted away from.
Yes.
So like a lot of this stuff is not even known to me. So like, our audience will be familiar with Fort Lauderdale, obviously, because of everything I mentioned, but
Mhm.
there's probably a much smaller minority that know who Major William Lauderdale was,
Mhm.
including myself, by the way. I did not know. And I've been traveling down to Florida. I got family around that area, Southeast Florida, since I was a kid. So yeah, it's crazy. But can you give a 30-second-ish elevator pitch? It could be longer, but
Yeah. Yes.
what makes this destination unique in the context
So
of the wider state of Florida?
yeah, so Fort Lauderdale is unique to Florida, to the United States. We started out as this little sleepy river settlement. It was just called the New River Settlement. That is the name of our historic river, is the New River. And while Miami was booming, we were kind of just steadily moving along. Our business was agriculture. Our business was not so much any big production for tourism just yet. But when we hit our building boom in the 20s is when everything took off. And you had the tourism for the boating industry, you had the tourism for the beach, you had the tourism for the casino pool, which brought down the college kids before we even had spring break. So that was our base for building up this city. Before we were the yachting capital of the world, before we were the Venice of America, we were the gateway to the Everglades. So
It's hard to imagine Fort Lauderdale or that area like pre-spring break.
yeah.
Pre-Disney World even, you know? Like
Yes.
it's such a
But
different.
it was always a destination. I mean, we have newspaper articles in our collections that date back to the like late 1800s that are talking about you guys go down to Florida, go down to Florida. We have some from Connecticut about a gentleman who came down, and it is my one of my favorite things to read because he's like, why would anyone go down there? It is hot, there are mosquitoes that block out the sun, and it is nothing but swamp.
Wow. Can you imagine? I mean, that guy, it's like saying like the iPhone is not going to be successful.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
It's crazy. That that makes me wonder. I mean, this is a question that just popped up into my mind, but like, what was there always people coming down to Florida? Like, was there what like when did tourism kind of begin? When was like the push to visit and not stay?
So the push to visit and not stay has actually happened historically throughout Florida because we are a winter destination. So the drive for, let's say, like our agricultural industry was that we had fields that could be planted year round. And then it becomes, well, you can stay year round. You can live here year round. We have lovely weather year round. And mind you, this was before anyone had truly experienced a hurricane.
Right.
So they didn't know just yet. And our building booms happened pretty much because they were building all these little spec homes for the tourists, for our snowbirds, to the point where we even had a school that was designed for the kids coming down in the winter so they could continue learning throughout the year.
Oh my God.
Yep.
That was kind of like the beginning of like the education system in the state.
So our 1899 one-room schoolhouse is our first school here in Fort Lauderdale, and we have a replica of it on our campus. And Miss Ivy Cromartie, who became Ivy Stranahan. And if anyone knows Fort Lauderdale, they probably know the name Stranahan. She was our first school teacher, and she taught about 14 kids for that first year that she taught before she married Frank. And then the city started booming, so they had to build the second school, and then Fort Lauderdale High School, which is our famous high school.
The
Our
Stranahan House is one of the historic sites, right?
Yes, so the Stranahan House is one of Fort Lauderdale's historic homes. It is 8 blocks east of our campus on the New River. So the wonderful thing about down here is you can walk from the Stranahan House to our campus, or you can take a free water trolley if you wanted to get a taste of the New River. And in between us is the Museum of Art. We also have the Museum of Discovery and Science. So there are a lot of wonderful little cultural institutions that you can experience along our river.
Oh, it's amazing to
Mhm.
have that all right there. So I did a little bit of background, or I did a little bit of reading on the background, but I understand the history of the area is vast. Way more people or different populations I thought kind of traveled through there than
Mhm.
originally than I knew. So you have everyone from like Native Americans to the Spanish, Seminole warriors, escaped slaves, bootleggers, the U.S. Army. I mean, wow. But all of them at one point or another kind of entering the mangrove swamps or around it, probably dealing with the mosquitoes that are blocking out the sun, like that one guy said,
Yeah.
and using the swamps to their advantage or hindrance at one point or another. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, like, but what did the area look like 200 years ago if one of us were to go back, hop in a time machine and travel back in time? Would we
It,
recognize it?
No, well, you would recognize it if you ever traverse Everglades National Park, I suppose. So if you ever have taken a hike or gone on an airboat ride through the Everglades or Everglades National Park, that is essentially what our area looked like. If you Hugh Taylor Birch State Park, which is here in Fort Lauderdale, is probably still the best remnant of what it would have looked like in Fort Lauderdale. And but it was the Everglades. The entirety of the southern half of Florida was the Everglades. We had to dredge and drain the vast majority of the land we live on to make it livable. So, but yes,
Is
it
there?
was
Yeah.
there's our river was crystal clear. Our pioneers say it was as clear as gin, which it was always fun. It
Wow.
is no longer. They said you could walk across the back of the tarpon, which made fishing really easily, which was why we loved our fishing in the 20s and the 30s and today still obviously, but you don't fish the New River so much any longer. And it was a wilderness. It was the last frontier of the, United States as we know it, short of Alaska, but the West was settled. We were not.
Wow, that is interesting. That's cool to think about it that way. If that's kind of like the boating ideology for some people. Is kind of like, you know, exploring frontiers, kind of pushing yourself outside of the norm. Is there places you could take a boat to see like historical sites, or is it all kind of inland?
All of ours in Fort Lauderdale are inland. I know if you want to go down south to Miami, you can go to Key Biscayne, and there's historical sites off the Keys and things like that. Obviously, Dry Tortugas. But for Fort Lauderdale and for Broward County, it is inland and mainland.
Okay.
Mhm.
So this snippet of Mike's upcoming feature shocked me the most, and so let's see if you can figure out why. He writes, in 1893, a road was opened connecting the Lake Worth area with Biscayne Bay. Today, it's known as US Highway 1. Scheduled stagecoach service ran 3 times a week and included an overnight stop at New River.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but stagecoach service, I don't know why, but stagecoaches feel so anachronistic to me, ever being in Florida. I just have a hard time envisioning them at all.
I just envision them getting stuck every like 50 yards or so.
And did that happen? I'm sure that happened, right?
Oh, it had to have happened, especially if the rainy season or anything like that. Whenever you get um a lot of water, something's going to get stuck. But yes, so they came down, it stopped right at our New River, it stopped at the Stranahan Trading Post, and then you had to take a ferry across our New River before the Florida East Coast Railroad train came down. So Frank Stranahan is the man who ran that ferry, and the Florida East Coast Railroad came down in 1895, and then it crossed all the way down to Miami. So it was a little bit easier to physically cross our New River at that point in time. But yes, it was a ferry. You had to load the stagecoaches onto the ferry with the horses or mules or whatever was pulling your stagecoach and get across our New River.
And you have, I'm trying to picture like what it was like back then. You have like 19th century dress, right? Like the garb
Yes,
that they wore.
yes,
Like
yes.
they're not wearing like,
No,
they're probably not even wearing capris, right? It's like
nope.
they're wearing long pants. Women are wearing,
Full
gowns.
skirts, yes.
Yeah.
Full skirts, and everything's, wool or cotton, depending on what materials you have. And yes, it was hot, but it also probably better protected them from the elements, like the sun, the mosquitoes. Everyone had their parasols to protect their skin from getting sunburned, but you were roasting. You were absolutely roasting.
Plus with all the humidity and all the,
Yes.
the fun that brings, that's crazy. So would you say that ferry had a, like, boating via the ferry had a pretty big like jolt to like the success of the city?
Yes, so our New River, we always say it was the first main highway. It was the first main artery. It is actually on our original plats, it is 0. And then they start moving outwards as 1. So it is counted as the main artery through the city. So everyone's boating, whether you were if you were a Seminole, part of the Seminole tribe, you were in your dugout canoes. If you were a pioneer and a settler, you were in your canoe boats, you were in your not quite yet, well, you had to sail boats, but you didn't have anything motorized just yet. So you were physically moving yourself down this river and any of the materials and goods that you had.
Were sailboats prominent? Like
Yes, yeah. Yep.
sailboat? Really? Okay.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Fort Lauderdale.
Also going off of some of the snippets that I read from Mike's feature, can you touch briefly on how the mail was carried between Lake Worth?
Yes. So before that stage line, before you had what is today US 1, you had the Barefoot Mailman. And he started out, it was the United States Postal Service wanted a more reliable way to get mail from what is today West Palm all the way to Miami. And so they hired a gentleman named Mr. Bradley to carry the mail. It was roughly, I want to say a little over 130 miles, but it was not straight walking 130 miles. Obviously, there's inlets, there's rivers that you have to cross, and that's where the boats come through. So there was, boating down the intercoastal, boating along the coastline to get to where you had to walk to next. And the mailmen, they had to develop a technique for walking, which I think is pretty fun. Because as anyone who knows who walks along our 6 miles of beaches here in Fort Lauderdale, it can get a little tiring. And so they had to elongate one stride So let's say if you're walking south, you had to elongate your right-hand side so you're even out on the beach. And then when you're walking back, you got to do it the opposite way so your legs wouldn't get tired.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just feel for these guys so much, like just thinking about, they're sweating through their shirt. They're probably the
Mhm.
straps like digging into their shoulder.
Yep.
And you're walking, with
Yeah.
this
And
crazy.
they did have places they could stop. We had the houses of refuge along the beach that they could stop and, get meals and rest. But my favorite little fun fact that is an alleged fact, I guess you could say, because I don't know how much we can prove it until something necessarily washes up on shore. Um, it's obviously a very lonely and job to have because you're walking for a long period of time by yourself. You're avoiding alligators and sharks and all different types of things. Well, apparently, the mailmen would bury casks of alcohol. So they knew where they would bury them, and then they'd stop, they'd rest, dig them up, and have a drink.
Sounds much deserved. I think it's
Yep.
always 5 o'clock for those guys.
Yes.
That's so funny. From now on, whenever I see a mailman, I'm just gonna think of
Do you have a flask on you?
yeah, well, the flask, but also I'm just gonna picture him or her doing like that walk they do from the movie Dune. Like,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I'm just gonna
Sliding
think about
around.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so you touched on it briefly before, but I'd love to know more about how Fort Lauderdale found itself on the map in the 20th century and kind of how did it start to become the boating capital that we see today? How did it become like this spring break destination and just like what developed the parts of it that, people that visit or live there know today?
So our spring break as we know it, or as we've historically known it, started with Where the Boys Are. So it was this movie that came out in 1960, and the majority of it was filmed here in Fort Lauderdale. And at that point in time, we were this little sleepy town that had, boating tourism and excursion tourism. So people could go out to the Everglades, take, the Jungle Queen and things like that, because that was around. It started in the 1930s, all the way out to Lake Okeechobee and back. And they'd have little stops at places like in Seminole Villages, watch alligator wrestling and things like that. But when Where the Boys Are was filmed here, it launched spring break in Fort Lauderdale. It was perceived as this fun in the sun destination where anyone could go, have a good time, and then you'd go back off to college and continue on with your life. So it was a very transient sense for this city. So we had a huge boom in the 60s for that. The city rebelled a little bit. They did not so much like all of the disregard that the spring breakers had for the city. So the government tried to put a squash on it for a little bit. And then in the 1980s, there was a remake of Where the Boys Are,
So
and we started all over again.
this movie like is
Yeah.
kind of like how, I mean, it seems like it was a movie was made about the
Well, it's based off a book. And it's
okay.
based off of a book that has explores this idea of a spring break during college and all of the wild shenanigans the kids can get up to.
So whereas like the Barefoot Mailman was existed way in the past, or these guys were doing this way back when, and then a movie was made, I think in the 50s maybe. So that was following. In this case though, the movie came out and then it drove all these people to visit.
Yeah, we had a pretty decent spring break in the sense that from the kids doing the swim forums here in the winter, like they would come back again in the early spring for swim break or for spring break, but it was just people who had been here before. Like you had to know about it to know that it was a quality place to go and have spring break and get away from the winter and get away from all the problems that you're having up at college. But it wasn't until it went on the big screen that people in mass were exposed to it. So yeah.
Is that the demarcating line between like prior to that movie and people coming down, different, probably younger college age people? Was it more of like an outdoorsman kind of like were people coming down to the Everglades?
Yes, people coming down to fish, they were coming down to do the excursions, they were coming down to experience something that, they don't see in the rest of the United States because our Florida Everglades is like nowhere else in the world. So it is something that they want to see for themselves, to experience just a different type of climate, a different type of people. And there was a lot of draw. Like I said, the draw was the gateway to the Everglades for that point in time before we became the Venice of America and then the yachting capital of the world.
And so yeah, so going off of that, when did like the bigger boats start to come, or when did like
so
yeah?
Our oh man, so we have a whole exhibit on it.
Oh, really? Okay, great.
Yeah, so we have a full exhibit in our museum on the history of the yachting industry, and it starts with the Seminole Tequesta in the dugout canoes, going all the way up to today's modern yachting industry.
Very cool.
Yeah, and we worked on it with the Museum Industries of South Florida, as well as the Dennison family, which is a huge yachting family here in Fort Lauderdale. And so the boat show would be the big kickoff, and that started out in the 60s. And now the International Boat Show it's definitely top 3 in the world. I don't know if it's 1 or 2. I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, because of the in-water aspect, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's the big part of it. Yeah, but it's definitely up there. It could be 1. Yeah.
So we had plenty of little mom and pop marinas along the New River, but with the building of Bahia Mar and Port Everglades is when we really started taking off for being able to get like deep water boats in here. So Bahia Mar was historically always an haulover site for like the Tequesta and the Seminole. It was a place where you could cut through to the New River. And then they built the marina. They dredged it, physically had to build the marina. And it is where obviously our International Boat Show occurs to this day. So it has always been a resort and boating capital, that marina. And Port Everglades, on the flip side, brings in the cruise ships. It is a freight hauling port as well. So we have many, many different types of vessels that come through here.
Sure. But that's really cool. So the Tequesta people, the earliest Native Americans that inhabited the land, were also in that area by Bahia Mar?
Yes. So we just did a dedication for the oldest Tequesta Midden, which is an archaeological site here in Fort Lauderdale 2 weeks ago. So it is a few thousand years old and is the best preserved Tequesta site on our New River. So it's now on the National Register of Historic Places. So yeah.
So the next time our listeners go down to Flibs, they're walking on land that has been inhabited by
continuously habitated. Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. Think about that next time you're on the docks. Okay, I wanted to pass it to you for a little sales pitch. You mentioned, the different exhibits. I mean, that boating one especially sounds right up our listeners' alley. But next time, people listening are in the Fort Lauderdale area, why should they check out History Fort Lauderdale and its campus?
So I call us a little historical oasis. We're a beautiful green space along our Riverwalk, and we have 3 museums that you guys can visit at any point in time. We're open 7 days a week from 10 to 4, and you can get a tour of all 3 buildings. So our main history museum has our marine history exhibit, along with exhibits on the Seminole Wars, exhibit on the founders of the buildings that you are physically going to be seeing as well, and founders of the city. And our Pioneer House is set up exactly as if this king family was coming home for dinner. So everything's freestanding. You walk in and it is essentially like you're walking into somebody else's home, but they're just not there. Unless you believe in ghosts, then they might be there.
Wow, that's great.
And then we have our 1899 replica schoolhouse, which is always fun. I had a group of students in yesterday, and they always ask me, they're like, did people really live like this? Did they really go to school like this? And I said, yes, it was a 1-room schoolhouse, but we updated it. There's air conditioning. You wouldn't have air conditioning in 1899.
Which will seem even crazier for every,
Yes, it is far removed. Although my favorite part is when I take the older groups in, and I'll have, somebody who is of a certain age, I will say, who will walk in and say, I sat at desks like that. I'm like,
I'm sure you did. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a walk down memory lane for them, and it is completely out of the norm for current school children.
Oh yeah, I mean, completely. Yeah. I mean, the thought of just not having air conditioning in Florida alone probably is beyond.
Yeah, we got it in 1953. And that was only in like hospitals and hotels. That wasn't in, everyone's homes.
Wow, you know the history of that even. That's
It's
awesome.
it's one of my Jeopardy questions.
Okay, yeah.
So,
That's a good one. Is
yep.
so the boating exhibit, is that a
Mhm.
permanent one or is that only
Yes,
transit?
it's permanent. Yep. So the boating exhibit is permanent. Our first floor are changing art exhibits. So we always have art from local artists up. And the third floor of our main museum are 6 local artist studios. So we like to obviously include the current happenings of the city because, as I say, what is happening today will be history one day. So you should value it just as much as you value your history. And we like to highlight and honor our local artists as well.
That's great.
Mhm.
Is there like a city marina close by that people can tie up their boats and check it out if they want
Oh,
to?
we have a public dock. Yeah.
Yeah, close
Yeah.
by, and then they can
Yep.
take the river walk
Mhm.
over?
Yeah, so it's, oh, I don't know, not even a street down, it's not even a block down, it's a stone's throw away, it's a public dock. So there's our campus, and then there's Esplanade Park, and it is right at Esplanade Park.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Mhm. And there's
Well,
a restaurant there too.
oh,
Yep.
you guys have provide everything.
Yeah.
That's great. I will definitely check it out the next time I'm in town. Uh, any final thoughts?
No, it was a lovely article. I was so happy that I got to help out and provide the photos for it because it was quite a lot of fun. I love going through our photo collection.
Oh, I mean,
So I'm excited to see it, and I hope everyone enjoys reading it.
yeah, completely. You and Mike did such a good job then supplying the photo. The photos pop, and I can't wait to read. I think I got I didn't get the entire feature, so I'm looking forward to reading the full one myself.
Yeah.
But Ellery, thanks so much for your insights into this fascinating subject. It was like a little mini history class. Um, and to our dedicated listeners, keep an eye peeled for Mike's story to learn more about the history of this wonderful destination. We'll see you on the water.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. This episode of the Power and Motor Yacht Podcast has been brought to you by Visit Lauderdale. And they want you to know that the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show will be dropping anchor in the yachting capital of the world this October. Whether you're a seasoned sailor, passionate angler, or yacht enthusiast, you're invited to explore super yachts, meet renowned boat builders, discover the latest water toys, and indulge in dockside dining with stunning waterfront views. Don't miss out. Visit visitlauderdale.com/events for all the details and plan your trip today.